Does that work okay? Okay, super. So I am always thrilled to be with these dear colleagues, Nina and Cassandra, who are not only staff of the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign, but remarkable activists and theologians and public intellectuals. And it is my real joy to introduce them to you today. So Nina Fernando, who's on the main screen right now, is the executive director at the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She first joined the Shoulder to Shoulder team in 2017, and she is a Sri Lankan Californian raised Catholic. Woo! California in the house, Nina. Her intersectional identities have informed her work as a multi-faith community organizer, activist, vocalist, and songwriter. If you ever have a chance to hear Nina sing, sign up. It's amazing. And then we have Cassandra Lawrence. Cassandra, can you say something so you go on the main screen, please?
Hello.
Okay, there she is. So Cassandra is the communications and community engagement manager of the campaign, and she's a trained mediator, dialogue facilitator, and interfaith and racial justice community organizer. She also teaches negotiation and conflict transformation primarily to faith communities. And recently this year, she graduated from Wesley Theological Seminary, and she received the Excellence in Public Theology Award. So congrats, Cassandra. So these dear ones are part of our staff team. And then I serve along with Esther Laderman, who's a Jewish leader, as the co-chairs of the campaign. And of course, there's a longstanding partnership with CCME and other entities as well. So we go way, way back. I'm going to tell you just the brief story about the Lutheran involvement in what led to the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign before handing it off to them. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, there was this swell of what had been decades of anti-Muslim bigotry that emerged after 9/11, and by the time we got to 2010, exactly 11 years ago, the Jewish and Christian colleagues put their heads together. These were national leaders of national organizations, denominations, and said, how can we publicly respond to this and publicly say we stand with American Muslims against the kind of bigotry they're experiencing, precisely because we've experienced it in our history too, in the case of Jews, and for the Christians as an act of discipleship. And so first there was exactly 11 years ago, a press conference held at the National Press Club, where all of these leaders came together and they made a statement, a public statement. And you can imagine that with all of the media attention on the self-proclaimed Pastor Terry Jones in Florida, that this wasn't exactly the most media-worthy thing, that faith leaders were coming together to say no to bigotry. But it did get picked up, and there was some momentum built, and the religious leaders said, we don't want this to just be a one-off, one-day kind of statement against bigotry and violence. And so out of that, the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign, which is now in its 11th year, was born. At the time of all of this, the ELCA was led by presiding Bishop Mark Hansen. My predecessor was Don McCoy, and the two of them were really involved in both the press conference and then in the conversations that led to the formation of the organization. And I have to say that it was such a gift from my point of view, but I think from the point of view of so many of us, that the leadership of the church said this is really essential to not only our siblings and our neighbors, but to who we are. Because as you can imagine, there is a lot of anti-Muslim bigotry even within our church. This doesn't come as a surprise, but often we're doing parallel work as we work with the campaign to help people understand Islam, to reach out in right relationship to their Muslim neighbors, and to really see all of this as part of our Christian discipleship. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over into the very capable hands of our colleagues and express on behalf of all of us gathered here in Chicago our appreciation for you joining us here.
Thank you so much, everyone. And it's good to be with you virtually. And if we were there in person, we would be partaking of those delicious sandwiches. And just grateful to have this time to share a little bit about our work at Shoulder to Shoulder. I'm going to share a few slides that illuminate um, just some pictures and snapshots of what we do in just a moment. Here we go. Can you see that? Great. Let me make it large. So as you heard, we are shoulder to shoulder, standing with American Muslims, advancing American ideals. And I want to quickly name, we actually shifted our name last year. Our tagline was standing with American Muslims, upholding American values. And we switched to and changed to advancing American ideals to show that this work is aspirational, it is ongoing. We still have so much to do to reach our American ideals, some ideals in which we have not yet realized, and that this is, rather than upholding something that was, we are advancing towards it. It's an active task set before us. And this is a little bit of who we are as a whole. We envision an America where people of all faiths and cultural backgrounds are treated respectfully, fairly, and with dignity. And we advance our vision by directly engaging faith leaders in the United States to be strategic partners, or as Catherine so eloquently put this morning in chapel, to be first responders in countering discrimination and violence against Muslims. And we do this through connecting, equipping, and mobilizing faith leaders. And one of the core pieces of our work is equipping, and through our Faith Over Fear trainings. And Sarah Trum there knows well what we cover in these trainings. And I want to name two, the theme that I heard you will be exploring this month is truth, lies, and misinformation. And a lot of this training is touching on those themes. What is true about Islam and Muslims, and here in America, and Islamophobia? What are the lies that we hear? The lies that has been spread through the Islamophobia industry, which is an intentional, multi-million-dollar funded industry, to spread disinformation, as well as kind of addressing the common myths and tropes and stereotypes that we hear, and that good people are misinformed by. And so we in these trainings we unpack Islamophobia. What is Islamophobia here in the United States? How do we talk about it? And then what can we do? What strategies can we enact in our local communities and in our unique way in our influence? And we're doing this in person, and we switched to a virtual space, and we were grateful to partner with the CCME to host one in Willowbrook at the mosque there that you were in partnership with, and we hope to come again. When we're able to travel in person and be able to offer this training in person. But for now, we have been hosting these trainings online, and we've put together a great package, I think, where you can explore the virtual content on a platform, and then we meet 4 times to unpack the content via Zoom. These are some snapshots of our trainings in person. This was in Louisville, and they all have a unique kind of tenor, if you will, depending on the needs of the community. This was in Wilmer, Minnesota, and this story was interesting to share. That there was a moment where this community, rural Minnesota communities, were making national news for the anti-Muslim groups and hate groups that had been forming and growing in those spaces. And so as I was gearing up to go to this training and to host this training, I was traveling alone, woman of color. I was scared. I was imagining I would drive into an unwelcoming community, and when I arrived at the community center there were so many people there saying, "We know that we've been making national news, and we want you to know this is not who we are." This is not representative of our community, and we are ready to push back. We are ready to learn, and it was so encouraging and really amazing to see that there are really good people all around the country who are ready to respond, ready to be equipped to speak to this, as well as to create programming and a plan to move people, change hearts, minds, and actions on this issue. I mentioned our virtual training. We also recently adapted the training that was originally created for faith leaders, and that means clergy as well as laity, as well as just people who are good and upstanding in their community that want to be, more effective at countering anti-Muslim discrimination. We recently adapted it for educators and parents and students, and hosted this training as well. We all the time are working on toolkits and resources. This was one that we did recently in partnership with a few organizations that we work with regularly. And I want to give a special shout out to the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU, that puts out so much great information about the American Muslim community, and reports and facts and data. And their website is a wealth of resources. So I want to give them a shout out. And I mentioned our 3 buckets of work: we equip, we mobilize, we connect. So with our mobilization, you heard the story of our founding from Catherine just now. That was a moment of mobilizing and coming together, responding to the needs of the time. And we do that in different ways through petitions, faith letters, showing up at actions, speaking at press conferences, pushing back against legislation or pushing forward legislation, and one of which was the No Ban Act in response to the Muslim bans, as you may remember. And so we are still working to show our leaders that this is not just a Muslim issue. This is an American issue that people of faith across faith lines care, and that this is not who we are and who we want to be. And so that is a huge push. And these are just different examples: signing pledges, speaking at press conferences, showing up in response to acts of hate. And this is just one example. And so there are so many creative things that we can do, whether it be pushing back and we say firefighting, or tree planting, and seeds that we can plant in our communities to move people on this issue. And connect. We every year during Ramadan host a campaign where we create a nationwide listing of iftars open to interfaith guests. Iftars are a fast-breaking meal during Ramadan, and it's a time when Muslims come together to share food after they fast. And so this is a great opportunity to get to know your Muslim neighbor. And before the pandemic, we were creating this nationwide listing so people knew where to go in their local communities and where these were being offered. And these are some glimpses of iftars in the different communities. We went in 2019 on a Ramadan road trip and visited iftars in the American Southeast and got to see different ways people are coming together. And that might be in a small setting. This was one that was very much community led, in a space that was reclaimed after an act of hate, and some that were bigger, and the city was in partnership with them to host. This was one in Louisville, Kentucky. This was in Nashville. This was at the convention center, quite large and very much connected to the city. And this one was in Atlanta, Georgia, run by a young adult Muslim group who had really strong interfaith relationships, and it was in the park there at the center of the city, which was really, really beautiful to see. And we host one every year in DC, and this is all before the pandemic, as you can tell, and different ways of bringing people together and showing people that the American Muslim community is quite diverse. That was a huge goal of our Ramadan road trip. And since the pandemic, we made a new program called Welcome to My Table, where we connected households to one another to connect during Ramadan. And we heard so many amazing stories of families coming together. We intentionally paired them so that families, for example, with young children could connect, or an interfaith couple could connect with another interfaith couple, and loved hearing, like kids comparing video games and sharing recipes beforehand. Another piece that we've been doing since the pandemic is hosting public conversations where we uplift leaders and talk about different themes and show just different examples of people doing good work in their communities in different ways. And we most recently held one last week on multi-faith solidarity, 20 years since 9/11. And these are recordings that are available. And you can check them out if you're interested. We host different workshops, and this is one that's coming up on allyship as an active way of life. This is a partner that will walk us through what allyship looks like, as well as what are the pitfalls of allyship and what to avoid when doing this work, and how it is an ongoing process of reflection and action. And moving us to solidarity, which is really, really great presentation that's coming up. We also have our next Faith Over Fear virtual training coming up in October. And we're in conversation about some in-person trainings in 2022. So these are just some examples of our work. That's what I have to share with you in terms of the visuals of our work, and also want to give a uplift that Cassandra from our team leads our community and congregational network, and this is an opportunity for local leaders, organizations, and congregational leaders to meet and share resources, share ideas, share events. But also work through challenges and talk about, different problems you're facing, and give a space where people can feel like they have community with others around the country who are doing good things. So that's just a snapshot of who we are and what we do, and want to open it up to you all if you have any questions or want to share some words about what you've done in your community. Any thoughts from what you heard from Catherine Laurie earlier today? Would love to just create the space to hear from you.
I have to say that Shoulder to Shoulder is my go-to place. I mean, it's really made for us. There's been opportunities for students to go to the ISNA, Islamic Society of North America, their big conference, national conference, and attend workshops and have conversations. They know the questions you're dealing with. We have a monthly call that I attend and hear about communities and congregations that are, this is what's happening in my congregation. This is what's happening. And so it's very like exactly what you're encountering and what you might encounter in the future. So all of their programs have been really timely, and I push the Faith Over Fear program a lot. But share your experiences and things that how you might see this being helpful for you, or questions that you have about what it's all, comments that you make that this was really helpful.
Hi, this is Michelle. I am assisting Sarah with CCME this year. So nice to meet you. I had a quick question. As most of us here are beginning pastors or working towards being a pastor in a congregation, how would you recommend we start introducing Faith Over Fear or Shoulder to Shoulder, or like even a congregational study on the Islamic phobia that's going around right now?
Thanks so much for that question. And I want to make space too for Cassandra from our team to share. I'll start by saying that you are most welcome to plug into any of our programming. Join our mailing list, and you'll find out about what's coming up. And you yourself have an understanding of the work and the resources, but also we're here and available, our team, to unpack what your congregation is going through uniquely. What are the different challenges that you're facing, and we can together think through if it's a book study, for example, what that book could be, or if it's ideas for a sermon, or sending you links and resources to our denominational partners like the ELCA, who has created so many amazing resources to begin thinking about this issue, and to begin thinking about what it means to be together in an interreligious, pluralistic world. So there's so many resources out there that we can point you to, and that makes sense for your local community. But we most welcome you to join our programming. Want to pass it to Cassandra to also share.
Thanks, Nina. What I would say is that one of the things that I've learned in the 4 years Nina and I came on at about the same, 2 weeks apart, I think 2 weeks apart, just as I was starting seminary. And one of the things that I've really learned and seen through working with Shoulder to Shoulder are the variety of ways that communities get involved. And so that if you look, like Nina's focus on, talking about book studies, sermons, like small group conversations, are good. Sometimes you have to do sort of an analysis of your community, and analysis could sound like a complicated word, but could also be just as easy as talking to folks to hear where they're at. And knowing maybe your community is already one that does Thanksgiving baskets for people that may not be able to have the funds to have a full meal. And maybe that's something that you can partner with a local masjid or a local mosque. And so that you might start there with shared service together. Or if there is a local, in DC yesterday, there was a unity walk along Massachusetts Avenue, which is sort of like a big open house for all the different religious communities along that road. And so there's a mosque, there's a synagogue, there's 10 different types of Christian, for Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Catholic. And so that's also a place for people to begin, just to be able to see oh, look, here's their building. Here's some really cute Muslim kids handing out those little rubber band bracelets. And so I think one of the things that I've realized in the work is that there's so many ways to come into the work. And so knowing and being in conversation with your community can help you have that creativity to say, look, we can start with a women's circle conversation over tea and coffee, or shared service, or a vigil, a shared community vigil. So
I'm going to say just a little something about the very first Faith Over Fear program that we took 19 folks from LSTC out to Seattle, and it was really powerful. And I would say that well, first of all, it was hosted by a LSTC alum, which was great. They have a very great program going on out there, and established a lot of work in this area. And that alumni, Pastor Terry Kylo, has continued to provide lots of resources and very practical things. One of the things that I heard most after that experience was, I feel like it gave me the ability to practice talking one-on-one with a congregation member, and just what that might feel like, and what that might well, I don't know what to say. I'm not an expert in Islam, I got those basic things, but not playing into the tropes that are already there. Not meeting people where their fears are, if it's irrational fears or not. What are the person's fears, and how can you talk through that? And then all the way to a media kind of presentation, knowing that the Islamophobia industry is real and powerful, And it's how can we meet that kind of energy and funding and all of those kinds of things with advocacy and writing letters to the editor and not all sorts of different ways of engaging with others at different levels. And so I think we all have different gifts in that. And even one of the recent workshops they talked about is what's her name? Ayer's. Maybe I'll let you talk about. Nina's getting it.
Sure. Deepa Iyer's social change ecosystem. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what it is really a way to identify the different roles that we all play in the social justice ecosystem, and that can, there's multiple, overlaying one another. But when you think about this particular issue addressing anti-Muslim discrimination, what are the different ways that you can engage? What's present around you? And then what is missing? It's a great tool that we explore in our trainings, and we've even held a workshop on with Deepa herself. And we can send that link if you'd like to look through it yourself.
One other thing that students have commented to me on after the sessions is that it addresses anti-Islamic bias, but it also plays into all sorts of different social issues that we're dealing with, racism and all sorts of things. So it's the training is applicable in lots of different ways. So yeah, I'm going to open it up to you all again.
Hi, everybody. My question is leaning into our theme of lies and misinformation. And I feel like we're at a moment right now with, the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan and just the 20th anniversary of 9/11. This is like a moment where I feel like a lot of different narratives or lies or information is being passed around. Like my wife was sharing with me a Facebook post of just someone saying, "Oh, 9/11, that was the day after was the most unified our country's ever been. Why can't we just go back to that day?" But, like stories of that Catherine shared in chapel of, well, that was not the best day for the Muslims in America. That was not a day that anyone wants to return to from that community. So just what sorts of narratives and information are you hearing right now? And what are maybe some of the truths or better ways that we can how can we kind of counter some of those lies and misinformation here in this present moment, these couple weeks?
Thank you. And yes, I think that first response that you had to uplift the different perspectives and what you see depends on where you've been standing or where you stand. And one of the pieces we think about most recently, for example, in our Faith Over Fear training that we adapted for educators, was this concept of windows and mirrors. And so, oftentimes when we hear narratives like that meme about the day after 9/11 being a day that we were united and it was a good day, who is telling that narrative and who is that speaking to and who does that exclude? Catherine, in her sermon talked about us versus them narratives that were shared in different ways, and some explicit and some implicit. And if you're not paying attention, like you were, you might not know, who is being excluded from that narrative. And yes, there are so many, especially with women and violence. That is a topic that constantly gets brought up, particularly now with Afghanistan. We're hearing the same old, narratives and misinformation and tropes about Islam, it is, yes, it's definitely a challenge. And I think that, as Sarah put, you don't have to be an expert to recognize dehumanizing rhetoric. You don't have to be an expert to recognize that someone's dignity is being questioned. And you don't have to be an expert to, begin to have a conversation about someone painting an entire religion or an entire community based on the actions of one or a few that are identifying as and no community is a monolith. And so there's a lot of different ways in which we can respond to the misinformation, and that might be in individual conversations, that might be publicly by sharing an op-ed in our papers, or by writing a sermon, or by sharing on our social media platforms. There's so many ways in which we can point people to resources to continue learning together. And it all depends on the context and where we begin. I hope that begins to answer some of what you are wanting to explore. Cassandra, do you have anything you'd like to add?
It was great, Nina. The specific piece around the 9/11 and the Taliban, like in conversations with a pastor recently, we were talking about this, how she responds to people who are very concerned about Afghanistan and women in Afghanistan and this narrative. And in that case, if it's a conversation that's one-on-one with someone, to me, there's a pastoral opportunity to meet that person and say, I hear you're really concerned about women. We're really concerned too. It's a war. There's a war going on. There's people being hurt. But not getting into a debate about what is or is not Islam, or what is or is not Sharia, but saying, the Taliban's oppressive rule, because Americans can understand that. We know what that is, as Nina was saying. We know what dehumanization is. We know what these things are, and just saying, like, yeah, we're concerned about that too. And there's all these Muslim organizations and Jewish organizations and Christian organizations doing good work to help and support people on the ground and people fleeing as well. And so just reminding people that there's a broad variety of people responding is helpful.
Hi there. My name's Margie. I'm a staff person here at LSTC, and have attended lots of events with Sarah, of course, and CCME, and really appreciate the work that they do. And I wanted to lift up first the change that you did to your name, Shoulder to Shoulder, and then changing from upholding, to a more active kind of verbiage. And so I think that is a good change to have, knowing that you're working towards something. And then my comment is more for myself, coming to Chicago and learning more about the Muslim faith and social injustices. And so I realized just that because I've been here, I've learned more about those things. And I have family in North Dakota who only know what they see on TV, and, that make a comment about that, the violence and the Taliban, and connecting that to being all of people of Muslim faith. And so I've had to kind of tell myself to step back and realize that they haven't had the kind of experiences I've had or the chance to learn. And so going gently into talking about, what their faith really is about, love, and talking about some of the basic things, just to try and start a conversation, I have found is helpful, because it's baby steps to when you're talking with someone. It's not going to happen just in one conversation. So I appreciate all the work that you do and all the events that you have. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you all who have shared so far, and that spirit of wanting to address this problem in different ways. And I think you shared a little bit about what that looks like to have conversations with your family, and that might also be like sharing your experiences, sharing your personal stories, sharing about the relationships that you have and that you have made, to that led you to where you are, sharing maybe moments of transformation. Maybe at one point you did believe XYZ, and you held that bias perhaps, and this is something that opened up, or presented cognitive dissonance that made me want to learn more, and I think that that's all a part of this work. So thank you so much for doing that.
Hi, I'm Eric. And my question, also about the misinformation emphasis. So since 9/11, it's definitely, there's been a push in our country, I would argue, towards authoritarian tendencies, like spying on our own people and things like that, and developing drones, um, and it's a real thin line between the misinformation on this side saying everything's fine, the United States is great, and the misinformation on this side saying, well, was it an inside job? Who did it? Was it Saudi Arabia? Whatever. And so I do feel like we're at a moment right now where there are certain things that the United States did very wrong. For one example, Guantanamo Bay. And we haven't reckoned for that. We haven't reconciled for that yet. And so it's hard to see people like President Bush speaking at the 9/11 event, and just question marks about misinformation over here saying, well, what did the Bushes have to do with gas and oil, and why did we invade this particular country even though there was no evidence? Or is that misinformation, or is this information? I guess reconciling with this one individual really used this event to push, I'd argue, an authoritarian push, and we're all kind of competing against that, pushing the pendulum back. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that particular topic.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like some seminary talk. There's, I feel like there's so much of what you said that can be unpacked further. There's a lot of misinformation on both sides, and all sides. There's not even both sides. There's so many sides, and there's a lot of truths and half truths, and disinformation, which is intentionally spreading, and I feel like with this topic of September 11th, oftentimes people think that or people who are not informed believe that might be the start of and the reason for Islamophobia. But something that we talk about in our trainings is this is not new, and choosing a community to attack, or anti-immigrant, xenophobic rhetoric, that is very much a part of the American story, and recalling moments in history. For example, the anti-Catholic sentiment, early on, and there were a series called the Blaine Amendments that actually barred Catholic immigration from Catholic-heavy countries, which is very much you could see a line there with the Muslim ban. And there's so many different glimpses and stories in history. Japanese internment is another example, and so I feel like there are things that we can point to in history that our country did wrong and have failed. And I think that can help begin the conversation to how we might be failing now and today, as well as 20 years ago, that day. And I think that a huge piece of the task before us is, rather than getting bogged down by how big it is and by how hard it is and by how confusing it is to start small, one step at a time, one seed at a time, one conversation at a time, one program at a time, one lunch at a time, and see yourself as a part of a movement, and know that it's not just that one, that there are many, and that this conversation is ongoing. I don't know, that's just some of what is coming to mind based on what you said and what you shared. I hope that's helpful. Cassandra, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add? I'd be happy to continue the conversation too, in another space, if you'd like to unpack further.
Hi, this is Christopher from India. I really, it's really wonderful to see and experience that the American churches have gone to kind of a great level of journeying with the Muslims and the other faith communities. The challenge that we face back in India, especially when we initiate the conversations and the journey with the Muslim faiths, the frontline churches look at look at this journey theologically, and they say that they don't want to be part of it. They go back to Bible saying that it is against the Christian community, so let us not relate ourselves. It is unbiblical. ELC is being a church and working, tremendously working on this area. Have you faced such challenge from any of the church groups? If so, how were you able to manage or tackle this issue? It is not the Islamophobia. It's not just merely socio-political, but theological too. That is from the churches. So, if you could kindly share some of your experiences, definitely that would help us to handle their back in India. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that is true. Sometimes that is the challenge, the theological differences, and there are so many resources. As you shared, the ELCA has put out so many incredible resources to begin exploring these big questions, and drawing from scripture, drawing from history, to help people move along on this. But I'll also share that, when we talk in our trainings, when we talk about the challenges people face, we talk about the different ways in which we can invite people along on a journey. And it's thinking about it through engaging our thoughts, minds, and actions on this issue. And so sometimes when we are at a different place, say with our thoughts or theology, it might be as simple as inviting someone, taking an action by inviting them to an iftar, to meet people and see that we are, share a meal together, and have a personal experience and a personal connection that can then lead to a deeper relationship, a deeper conversation, and explore the topics from a different approach. And so when we stay in the place of tension, so if it's theology and we want to engage in a theological debate, that doesn't always lead to, and sometimes it just doesn't lead to a place where the person could be receptive to thinking in a new way. And a lot of what we also come back to is identifying shared values. So say there is a theological difference. What are the values that we share? Whether that be human dignity, whether that even be, we live together in the same neighborhood and we want safety for our children. Whatever those shared values are, starting from there and tapping into that, and then exploring to a deeper conversation.
To your question, I think knowing that each country's context is very different, and each community has their own history of community interactions. What we've seen in Shoulder to Shoulders work and in my work doing religious peace building is that your theological beliefs don't necessarily mean that you will or you won't engage with the other. You will or you won't engage with the stranger or the neighbor. And so that when the Syrian, when there was a lot of Syrian refugees coming across into the United States, we saw conservative Christian communities who would never call their member of Congress, who would never be on the street demonstrating, wanting to be good neighbors and receive and support refugees and immigrants. They wanted to serve and be there for them. And so in that way, that became an opening to learn more about Islamophobia, to learn more about anti-immigrant sentiment, and to learn more how to live into those values of what it means to be Christians and what it means to be a good neighbor and a good citizen in our countries and in our communities. Whereas like on other sides, we also have more, we have different Christian communities who are more activist into political spaces, who will want to like stand up and be on marching on or talking to Congress. And there's also a place for them. And so that we work with communities across a theological spectrum who all say that our core value is that we need to be better. We need to be better neighbors. And that includes to our Muslim neighbors. And so that has been something that I've really learned working with Shoulder to Shoulder, is that we see communities with a variety of
and add a couple of pieces to what our brilliant colleagues have shared, because I think your question is global Lutheranism, but also Lutheranism within the United States. That one of those fault lines in Lutheran, actually September 11th and the aftermath, president of the decision on the basis of his theological service immediately following, and he faced significant pushback, but then also consequences. Very close friends with the head of Lutheran Disaster Response Office space with. And I remember being in spaces with him. Vision. He was having conversation household, so to speak. But also security for him. I think that, because I see we have Mark on ELT points on Lutheran, which there's a copy of up here, and you can download them for free from our website. But I think those are the kind that will enable us to have that ecumenical conversation about an interfaith relationship and commitment, including not dismissing that we come from different places on that spectrum of whether or not to engage and whether or not our theology supports that engagement. The last thing I want to say is that this is also, of course, part of an important conversation we're having with the Lutheran World Federation and our colleagues, because precisely for the reasons you named, the Lutheran Muslim experience in so many other parts of the country, or so many other parts of the world, is almost the exact opposite paradigm than what we're dealing with here. So how do we think about that together? How do we think, for example, with Lutherans who are in Nigeria under not only significant persecution, but also subjected to violence by extremists? So it goes back, in a sense, to that conversation that that Nina and Cassandra warned us against. You know, how do we articulate what our tradition is and how that looks different from extremist forms of it, and own that as a word of self-criticism first. I think that that's a key piece of this puzzle, and it's a continual conversation that we ought to be having across contexts.
Yeah, big stuff. I know one of the other pieces that I've appreciated about shoulder to shoulder experiences that I've had is that more fundamentalist kind of Christianity has been represented at some of the events, and be able to hear that voice, because I don't hear it. I don't have access to those communities very well, and it's been really important to talk about things like proselytization and that kind of thing in interfaith interactions, and how to handle those kinds of situations. So yeah, multiple levels of different experiences from different communities of faith. Other questions, comments, or? Yeah.
This is more of a question to both of you. Could you just send us some of the, like an email, some of the links to some of these resources that you're talking about, just to help make it one step easier? That'd be great.
Catherine, I wanted to just ask if you would be willing to follow up a little bit on the tail end of the comment you just made about when distinguishing between kind of extremist forms of the religious traditions we belong to. A helpful place to begin with is a kind of an element of self-awareness or self-criticism. Could you give some examples of like ways that we can do that internal work, or kind of behind the wall work, before we move into that in a religious space?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I think there's the first part of starting with yourself to say, how do I understand my living faith, and how do I understand that being active in the world, and what does that require of me? So that's the first kind of internal reflection, and then that to go back to that conversation between Benke and the head of the LDRNY. Where are we inviting those difficult conversations with people who hold different viewpoints or perspectives, or stand in a different place than us, that enriches how we see ourselves and complexifies it? Because almost always when we have those conversations, we realize it's not a black and white situation. It's very nuanced, and that our sibling is actually entering in from a very complex human space as well, with a rich theological self-understanding. But to the other piece of this that I think is important to name is to think about why we do interreligious work. If it's to be on the front lines and in the headlines, if you will, about I stand with these people against bigotry, and that's it, and there's nothing that goes deeper, and there are no relationships you can call upon or bring to mind when you're doing it, that requires a lot of introspection, right? Because then it's really doing it for the show, and not because of the richness of relationships that undergird it. And I have learned tremendous amount, in particular from Nina, on this piece, that it always goes back to those relationships that really help us to claim out loud why we do what we do, and to do it better, so that this conversation on allyship that she mentioned coming up, it has to be within our toolkit to say, we can't just project an idea of allyship. We have to discern that in conversation and consultation with those who we're trying to be allies with. And so Shoulder to Shoulder and CCME have been really critical partners in developing those relationships. Sarah mentioned the work with the Islamic Society of North America Convention, but also here in the neighborhood. And CCME is continually lifted up as a model for having actual relationships that undergird its work. And it makes such a remarkable difference. So everything from the internal introspection to the consultative, collaborative conversations to the actions that reflect real relationships.